Hello everybody. So this is the 5th time that I've tried to make this video in the last few months, and I'm giving it another go. So this is my video on setting about wargaming in the Wars of the Roses. Now, I've done this for a number of reasons. One reason is that I get quite a lot of emails and quite a lot of messages asking me, I like look at the Wars of the Roses, I've watched your videos, I've watched some history videos, and I've seen other games. How do I get into it? And I find it really hard to answer. So this is going to be my attempt at doing that. Also, some of my close gaming friends are now getting into it, and I've had about three phone calls with Ken from Miniature Wargaming Warriors, which I think has actually totaled nearly 3.5 hours on the phone. And I've had loads of messages from people, and I thought I'd just give it a go and just see what I can do. Now, this isn't going to be a history of the Wars of the Roses. It's not anything about the causes of the Wars of the Roses. It's very simply how I set about gaming, looking at some of the models, looking at some of the options that you've got, some of the rules options, and just running through some main points and just giving you that information, really. So it might be a bit of a ramble, might be a little bit off the cuff, and what I'll do is down the bottom in the description I'll leave links to all of the companies that I mentioned for the various rule sets and the models, and I'm going to show you some examples from my army and show you how I go about things. So when we say the Wars of the Roses, what we're actually talking about is a period of about 35 or more years where there were 5 different kings, and the wars were effectively, to paraphrase Mike Ingram, who I'm going to talk about a little bit in his books, they are a war for supremacy, for control of the English throne. It's not over religion, it's not over money, it's all about who is top dog, who is sitting on the throne. Okay, and in that time there are 16 actual battles, full-on battles. Now, there are numerous rebellions, there are revolts, there are skirmishes, there's sieges, although sieges don't play a major role, and we'll come on to that. But there's loads of little bits and bobs as well, which can really fuel the wargaming side of things. On top of that, it's not just York and Lancaster, which is what a lot of people seem to think. So you've got the House of York and you've got the House of Lancaster, but within that you've got all these other minor feuds between different families. You've got like the Percy and the Neville feud. The Neville side with the Yorkists, so the Percys automatically go to Lancastrians. So there's loads of little scores to be settled. And the great thing is that everyone's a bit of a bastard, so they're always changing sides. You get Warwick, who's Yorkist for like the first half of the war, and then he turns against Edward. And anyway, we're gonna have a look at all of this kind of stuff. So I'm going to go through this in a bunch of stages, and the first stage is I'm actually going to look at armies themselves, and yeah, I'll crack some models out. Let's have a look. Okay, so let's talk about the armies in the Wars of the Roses. So here I've just got a selection of units out from my unit box, and I'm going to go through them and the role that they use in the Wars of the Roses, and also pretty much sort of why I've done them the way that I have. Armies in the Wars of the Roses, you've basically got 4 main groups. You've got your men-at-arms, who are your sort of, you know, armoured hand-to-hand combat fighters. You know, they're your retainers, that they're the better armored troops in harness, like these guys here. You have your archers, which are pretty self-explanatory, which is almost the backbone of the army. You have your billmen, your spearmen, and then you have your cavalry. Okay, now on top of that, you will have other things like artillery and mercenaries that come with some other bits. But the 4 main things are men-at-arms, archers, billmen, and cavalry. In the Wars of the Roses, it was still using the main medieval system of warfare, and that is that in battle, the armies would usually array in 3 separate sections, referred to as battles. And each of these battles would be commanded by a senior commander. So in a lot of these battles, you will see the king commanding one, and then he has subordinates commanding the other 2. One of these battles would usually be selected as the vanguard, and that's the unit or the bulk that goes in first. That's fairly standard. So you see these three blocks array against each other, and then they basically smash into each other. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't room for some, you know, fun tactics and flanking manoeuvres, which we see in the Wars of the Roses. Now, the main thing is the archers. Now, the archers would either be in their battles, or they'd be lined up in front of the army, such as at the Battle of Towton. So they'd line up in front of the army, loose a big arrow storm, and then they would melt away back into their battles. Or they would operate in their battles individually, such as Tewkesbury, where they would exchange fire with another battle. And the thing is, after the arrow storm, the archers they don't just disappear. They don't just, you know, go off to the sides. There's no sort of sniping from the edges. They would be in then with swords and bucklers, and they would get stuck in as well. At this period, you're looking at a ratio of, it kind of differs, but 3-to-1 or 2-to-1 archers to other men. And if 2/3 of your army disappears because they fired all their arrows, well, what are you going to do then? So no, they go and they get stuck in as well. Now, the way that I represent that on the board is with these bases here of bill and bow. Right, so here you can see one of my main bill and bow units. Okay, so this is one that I've finished in my current Kingmaker Warwick project. But what I do, and let me just scooch these guys over, I make two bases of bowmen, and then I make one of bill. And that's very simply just because of the way that I game, and we'll come on to this, but that's because I'm using Hail Caesar. But I also play games like Nevermind the Bill Hooks, so I base them separately. So if I want to, I can remove the bill, and if the game dictates that I can't use mixed units, I've then got my separate bases that I can put together. The ways the army would muster: the Lord would call on his retainers, and then they would basically flock to his banner. They would raise their men. So they might come to the battle with, you know, 6 men-at-arms and 30 archers. Those archers are then going to join the main bulk of the battle that they're assigned to. They might wear their Lord's livery, but they could also be wearing his Lord's livery. So, you know, these archers might belong to someone like William Parr. However, because he's in the service of the Earl of Warwick, they're wearing his badge, his livery. That being said, not all of them would have been able to afford this, so I try to mix in a fair amount of men who are just wearing sort of everyday clothes. The reason I chuck the bill in there is to basically just represent that idea that the archers are, after they loose their arrows, they're getting stuck in. I like having the option of making units of just bill, but I find that this works. Now, very quickly, just touching on basing, I base mine for Hail Caesar. And myself and my main opponent, we decided that in a game of Hail Caesar, using the Wars of the Roses, we would say that 2 bases would be a small unit, 3 bases is standard, and then 6 bases would be large. The only exceptions to that being pikemen, where we've said the standard is 4, because you want to perform a block. And that's because, unlike things like Napoleonics and bolt action, or World War II, there is no hard and fast guide to the number of men that were brought along to the battles. We have some muster rolls, and we can see information on how many like arrows, sheaves were being ordered, or bow staves were being taken. But generally, we don't have like a huge idea. The numbers for the battles are usually inflated by whichever side won. So even though it says there might have been 60,000 people at Towton, you know, it's probably more likely like 30 or 40,000. So we can't really rely on it, and I felt that this was a good way to compensate, because I don't want to build up loads of archers and then have them not doing anything in the battle. So I felt this was a good way for the scale of game that I'm playing to represent that. So these are my standard unit, and the way that I try to show the 2-to-1 ratio, or just not have too many units that aren't archers, is I don't build more units than I have units of bill and bow. So basically, if I was building an army with 20 units, I would make sure that 10 of those are bill and bow, and the other 10 are then a mix of, say, men-at-arms and cavalry and things like that. And that gives me just about the right kind of ratio. The next type of unit are the men-at-arms. So these are, as I've already said, the more heavily armoured guys. They're the ones in harness, half harness or full harness, which harness refers to the armour. And they go and they get stuck in. And as you can see, I just do these 3 bases as well. But what I like to do with these, and I do with my bill and bow as well, there are loads of lords and there are loads of knights involved in the Wars of the Roses who didn't take big command positions, but they'd have turned up to the battle with their men and they'd have fallen into the battle line, and I like to include them. So this is the Earl of Essex. That's his personal coat of arms, and that's his personal standard. So what I decided to do for him was I painted this unit of men-at-arms in his livery colours, and it's a way for me just to include them. I've said before, the medieval battle line would have been absolutely full of pennants and banners, and we've got access to all these banners. Like, the medieval period isn't this dull, drab, brown, grey landscape. It was quite colourful. Medieval people loved colour. You know, we can see it in on the illumination of manuscripts, on the artifacts that we recover, and the paintings that they had. So they love it. So that's one example there. Another example is in this unit here, which is Geoffrey Gate, in one of the more recent units I've done. As you can see here, like I say, I've just chucked that in, and these are one of the main forces that go into battle after the arrow storm. And again, I just keep that 3 bases wide. Right, let's mention cavalry. So everyone knows about knights. So these are the knights that I have. I've got a couple of units of these. These did not play massive roles in battles. Okay, we have a few battles where there's some heavy cavalry charges. The Battle of Bosworth is probably one of the most famous ones, where Richard III leads a massive cavalry charge, trying to go for Henry Tudor. Didn't work out so well for him. More likely, the light cavalry were a little bit more effective, but you know, you have got there was heavy cavalry and there were people who charged. So I've made up a couple of units of these, no more. I didn't really feel that I needed any more, and you know, I've basically looked at history, and there are a couple of guys here. This is Fitzwalter, and this guy over here, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's Warwick's half brother. So I decided it'd be quite fun to put them in a unit and use them. But more often than not, it's the light cavalry that get used in the Wars of the Roses. So for example, at Tewkesbury, Edward positioned his cavalry in a position in a wood nearby. The Lancastrians did something similar at Towton, and then once the battle was joined, they would get stuck in. So they're more lightly armed. There are records of mounted archers who would dismount and then join the battle lines. They've just got spears, but they would also be prickers. They would also, if their own men started to turn, these guys would ride behind the battle lines and they would basically poke them and make them go back. But as soon as the rout happened, that's when these guys happened. That's when these guys spread out. They get stuck in among the fleeing enemy, cut them down, and looking to capture the nobles. Or those capturing nobles in the Wars of the Roses wasn't really for ransom. Most of them ended up getting executed. So that's the cavalry. Now you got your commanders. Now, the best way to get, I find, to research the Wars of the Roses is to basically pick a battle, find a battle that you're interested in, and look at the commanders, and maybe just pick a commander from it. So this is Falkenberg, Lord Falkenberg, William Neville. This is the Earl of Warwick's uncle, and he was a commander from the 100 Years' War who was a lot more reliable, and one of the few people in the Wars of the Roses who didn't get executed. He died in bed. Anyway, we're not doing a history on him, but this is a standard command base. Now, I would use this command base in multiple systems, and this would command a division, a battle. But if there's, you know, I've already said I've made up people like the Earl of Essex here. I've already made him up on this separate base, and I've also made up Geoffrey Gate. So this is Geoffrey Gate, and there was a battle, the Battle of Edgecott, where he was a commander himself. And, you know, look, because I've done it on this base, he can be in there. The fact he's not around doesn't bother me at all. So, basically, for these, I just pick a main commander, someone like Warwick or Edward or Somerset if you want to be Lancastrian, and just start building out your forces there. You can also do a little bit of research into some of their sub-commanders, add them into the units, add a bit of colour. Finally, both sides had mercenaries who would come and fight for them. So the Yorkists were allied with Burgundy, hence the Red Cross of Burgundy, and both sides had access to artillery, which became more and more prominent as the wars went on. And by the end of Bosworth, there were quite a few cannons. I basically just made up a few bases of these, 2 bases wide, small units, from the mercenary set, which we'll talk about, and just pop those in. But again, I haven't made up very many of these. I didn't want to have more mercenaries than I did normal bill and bow troops, and they can just be there to support. And again, with the cannons, they're not going to be game breaking, but they're there, you know, and in most rule systems they will have an effect on morale, so you're probably going to want a cannon. So basically, to summarize the armies, you're going to want bill and bow. Now, some people might find those a bit dull to paint. I really enjoy painting them, but you're going to want those, and you're going to, I would say, probably want at least half your force to be bill and bow, unless you're making something specific, and you know that, you know, they had, maybe it was just a cavalry force, the Flower of Craven, which was Clifford's force springs to mind. Once you've got that, I would then say, you know, if you were aiming to build, I'm going to build 6 units, I'll do 3 of bill and bow, potentially do 2 men at arms, and then add a cavalry unit, and that would be a pretty good, you know, force. But the main thing is you need to look at the size of the game, and now we're going to come on to the next section, which I want to talk about, which is what rule sets are available to you to use. Okay, let's talk sizes of games and rule systems. Now, these are the 2 that I mainly play, but I'm going to go through a few that you might want to consider if you're playing the Wars of the Roses. The main one that I use is Hail Caesar by Warlord Games, written by Rick Priestley. And this is the same system as Pike and Shot and Black Powder. And it's a solid system, and I like it. It's, you know, it doesn't get too convoluted. It's got a good command and control element, and it just suits the kind of games that I like to play. The only thing with Hail Caesar is that there is no specific Wars of the Roses supplement, so there's no army book or, you know, campaign book yet. Maybe they will, but you know, we'll see. However, in the rule book, you do get the templates for different troops, so you can, if I can find it, there we go. So here we have heavy cavalry, medium cavalry, cataphract cavalry, light cavalry. So you can basically create your lists. You know, you could just say that cataphracts are the heavy cavalry, you know, the armored knights, and then you've just got things like heavy infantry and medium infantry. I class the bill and bow as medium infantry, and obviously the men at arms as heavy infantry. Now, over on Perry Miniature's Facebook page, they did a Wars of the Roses campaign, and Rick Priestley actually created and shared an army list that they were using for their games, and that's on there, and there'll be a link down below. Go and have a look at it, and you can see it. And that's what we used initially for our games. However, we wanted to take things a little bit further, and the cool thing about Hail Caesar is it gives you the tools to let you to do that. Which is what this is here. So this is my army list created from the Hail Caesar book, and I've just gone down each of the types of units I've got, the ones I've just shown you. So crossbowmen, you know, Calais veterans, longbowmen, handgunners, you know, and I've just gone through and added them in. What I've also done is I've started making rules for the various characters we've got. So Falkenberg, who is the one we were looking at, added strategy ratings, and also some homebrew rules, but they're additions. You don't have to have those. So Hail Caesar is also a mass battle game. So you're probably looking at, you know, probably, you know, 100 to 200 models minimum aside. But when you think about it, that's not that many. You could have a really good game with probably 8 units on your side. So 8 sets of 3 bases is the way I would do it. And we've had great games using only 1 commander. So Hail Caesar, I recommend. It seems to work well. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The other game I use is Nevermind the Billhooks by Andy Callum. This came free with Wargames Illustrated, and you can get it through, I think it's North Star Games. And this is much more of a large skirmish, small battle game. It represents those little actions that you maybe didn't hear about, you know, the raids across the border that we know happened, the Battle of St Albans, which was more of a big scrum, to be honest. But I have seen some cool reports where people have used this for the bigger battles. It's got a command and control system in it, and it's got things like an event deck where you can, like, you know, suddenly a hidden ditch appears and, you know, people fall into it or someone swaps sides. It's a good fun game, basically. I can't say this. It's not trying to be an accurate representation of medieval warfare. It's a skirmish set of rules with a Wars of the Roses flavour to it, and it's good fun. So if you were wanting to do something not on the same mass battle scale as that, then never mind the bill hooks, would be a good look. And that's it. This is the full rulebook. I believe there is a second edition coming out very soon, but if you go over, they've got a very active Facebook page, so have a look at that. Other rule systems that you might want to try out, which I don't have the books for, are Lion Rampant, which is again sort of a skirmish, large skirmish style game. That's published by Osprey. I have played Lion Rampant. I do enjoy it. Again, my basing system doesn't work for it, so I use someone else's models, but it was good fun. There's a new set of rules that came out, I believe, a couple of months ago called Test of Resolve, which I haven't looked at yet. That deals with much larger battles, not necessarily the same size as Hail Caesar, and that's a system I want to have a look at, and that's written specifically for the Wars of the Roses. Another system is Impetus, which covers so many different periods, but there is a Wars of the Roses specific list in there. And I know Mortem et Gloriam will be doing Wars of the Roses. I know they had a Wars of the Roses list in their last edition. So there are plenty of options out there if you want to get involved. Now, out of those, I'd probably say that Hail Caesar is the sort of largest. Now, obviously, I'm doing all things here in 28mm. But let's have a look at the miniatures themselves and have a look at the companies that you could do if you want to get involved in Wars of the Roses. Let's see what your options are model-wise. Okay, so if you watch my channel, you'll know that I love and use the Periplastics for pretty much all of my Wars of the Roses stuff. They're very good at kit bashing. The Peri miniatures have an extensive range of Wars of the Roses metal miniatures, and they have individual commanders, they have cannons, and they also have, I think it's 5 sets of plastics. So you have the Mercenary European Infantry, which lets you make handgunners, crossbowmen with purvey shields, and pikemen. You also have the Foot Knights, which we've already seen, which are your heavy infantry. You get 38 in there, you get 40 in that box. You have the Wars of the Roses infantry, which is your bill and bow, and there's about 40 in that. You have your mounted men-at-arms, your heavy cavalry, and then you have your light cavalry. Now, the cool thing is, with all 5 of these sets, all of the pieces are perfectly interchangeable, meaning you can get loads of customization across. And these are 20 quid a box, and you get a good amount of plastic in there for your money. Add in a few peri-metals, and you can do an army for not very much money at all. And on their website, they've got some deals as well. Other companies which make Wars of the Roses miniatures include a 28mm, anyway I should say, these are 28mm, are Front Rank Miniatures, First Corps Miniatures, Athena Miniatures that ran a successful Kickstarter not long ago, and they've just gone live, and they've got some Wars of the Roses armies on there, and they've got some cool things on there as well, like people being in arming jackets and like getting ready for the fight. Also Foundry have some Wars of the Roses miniatures as well. Now, if you aren't wanting to go 28mm, maybe you want to do the Wars of the Roses and you want to get those large armies in there, you might want to go 6mm. And for 6mm gaming, Bacchus have got you covered. They've got a big range of Wars of the Roses models. If you want to scale up a little bit at 10mm, Pendraken, they also do it. It's listed under late medieval European infantry. And if you want to go up one more and do 15mm, Peter Pig is the place to go there. So I'll drop links. All of these are in the description below. But the Wars of the Roses is pretty extensively covered. I've just remembered one other one for 28mm. Steel Fist Miniatures produced some late medieval, late 15th century sculpts. They're mostly in European armor, but that European armor was making its way over here. The nobles would pay for that expensive armor, and they make some lovely models as well. So those are the miniatures that you should be taking a look at. So the next thing I'm going to look at is the flags, because I've talked about them, and I'll show you what I use. Right, let's talk flags. I have 3 main sources. I use Freezy Water flags, the inserts from the Peri boxes, and Pete's flags. Now, there are 3 main types of flags in the Wars of the Roses, and I think this is where a lot of people get worried or maybe a little bit overwhelmed, but I try to keep it quite simple. You have standards, which are these fishtail banners. So this one here is for the Earl of Warwick. You can see it's there as well. You have the coats of arms, which are ones like this and these. And then you have livery flags, which are like this one here and this one here. These things down here are cornets. I'll explain about those in a second. Now, by far the most extensive catalogue is from Freezy Water flags. Now, I think that was all done through the Lance and Longbow Society. They have a huge catalogue, and as you can see, this is for Richard III's army at the Battle of Bosworth. So there's Richard's coat of arms up there. But say you want to do Sir William Catesby, well, look, there you go. There's his flag. You could chuck him in a unit, paint that on his tabard, or try and paint that on his tabard, or scratch something that looks kind of like a lion in a biro, which is not unheard of. And then you're good to go. Some of this information is a little bit old now, so some of it is worth double checking, but it's a really, really good guide and a good place to start. The other one is looking at the inserts from the Perry boxes. When you buy a box of Perrys, you'll get something that looks like this. Loads of information, loads of painting guides, how to assemble it, but it does always come with banners, and it comes with European ones as well. So here we have, Richard III standard, and then we have Richard Neville the Earl of Warwick underneath it, plus some more. Now I'm fairly certain that they mix these up, because I've bought the same box and I'm sure I've ended up with different standards in them. But what I do with these, I actually copy these onto high quality paper from an art shop. I use 80 to 90 gram paper, and I use a high quality printer to do it, and that's because this, no matter how many times I use a matte varnish on this, I can never get rid of that shine. So that's what I do with those. And then finally we have Pete's flags, and these are amazing. So he sells on eBay, and he's got a decent sized catalogue, but he's got some more of the less heard of lords as well. But here you can see we have Richard Neville standard, we have his personal coat of arms, and then we have the livery flag, and these two would have been near him in the battle. The standard and his coat of arms wouldn't have been too far away from where he is, marking out his position for his men and I guess also the enemy. This is the livery flag. This would have been distributed among his units, among his men, just showing who they belong to. And these are cornets, and they would have been there as well. You'll see these are sort of minor versions of this. These have been distributed through his units, and that's the same for all the major lords. As we talked about earlier, you would see his pennant, you would see it everywhere in units that were loyal to him. So those are the main sources of my flags. There are other companies that make flags. I think Flags of War do some, and you can find a lot of information online, and you could always make your own. But between these three, I've pretty much got everything that I need. If you watch my, I'll put a link up here about how I do flags on miniatures, and that's the process I use for these. But basically, that's it. I mean, just as long as you've got, say, a standard, you don't even have to have them, but that's one of the fun things about the medieval period, is all of the heraldry. If you don't want to paint heraldry, or if you don't want to be into the heraldry, then it's something that might put you off. But you can get transfers if you want, or just don't paint the livery badges on them. You can find out through a little bit of research what livery colours people wore. Just do that. If someone's red and blue, just paint them red and blue. Don't worry about trying to actually paint the white rose or anything like that on them. Just whack on the standard on the standard bearer and have at it. Right, the last thing I want to touch on when maybe wargaming in the Wars of the Roses, if you're interested, is research. You get your Osprey books, but there's 3 books that I think are worth looking at. And the first one, which is basically a bit of a primer, is this one here, which is the Wars of the Roses: The Key Players in the Struggle for Supremacy, by Matthew Lewis. Now, Matt Lewis is I think he's actually the chairman of the Richard III Society now, but that doesn't really come through in this. And this is a brilliant book. It deals with the whole thing, and it goes through it. And that's a really good, solid book, which will run you through things without an agenda, basically. Obviously, this is part of the problem, which when you start reading about things, you inevitably get onto the Richard III stuff. Now, I have my opinions on the Richard III stuff. It's probably more in line with what Matt Lewis thinks, but if you're looking for something cool, there's this. There's also The Hollow Crown by Dan Jones. I'll leave a link to that here, which is also a good primer and overview of the whole Wars of the Roses as well. And now my 2 favourite books, which deal with the military side of things, are this one here, The Battle of Edgecote. 1469 by Graham Evans. And it's a fantastic look at the one of the smaller, less well-known battles between the Earl of Pembroke and Robin of Redesdale, which is actually the Earl of Warwick. And it just looks at the evidence that we have, it looks at the chronicles, and just, you know, looks at where the battlefield is, and it just reevaluates everything. But there's a lot in here from the primary sources all at the back, and it's a great book, and it's not a great deal of money, and it's well worth a read. And a book which I think is fantastic now is this one, and this is by Mike Ingram. Now Mike Ingram is a fantastic author on the Wars of the Roses. He does other things as well. He works for the Battlefield Societies, as Graham Evans does, but this book is fantastic. This has only been out about a year, and it doesn't just deal with the Battle of Bosworth. It deals with, it gives you an overview of the Wars of the Roses, weapons and warfare in the Wars of the Roses, and, you know, a little bit about the organisation, the horses that they use, the type of armour they're using. This is if you're interested in this, you know, how even down to the communication and logistics of the armies on the march. And then it looks at, well, obviously Richard Duke of Gloucester, and the role of the French in the Battle of Bosworth. I mean, if you want to get into a project, the Wars of the Roses has a lot to offer. There are some other smaller publications by Freezywater publications, and they do some cool books like this one, Standards, Badges and Livery Colours of the Wars of the Roses. Explains a little bit about the standards and the basic symbols that all of them had, what their mottos were. That's a good solid book. And then there's these three which they produce, which, look, there's one on Towton, Tewkesbury, Battle of Barnet. You can find lots of little publications like this, and there's always some hidden gems in here. Now obviously I've gone quite deep into the Wars of the Roses now. These are just the books that I happen to have nearby me at the moment. I'm currently reading this one, which is a Dominic Mancini book, which is a new translation of basically an eyewitness to the events around Richard III and the Prince in the Tower. And I've also got this one here, the Battle of Northampton by Mike Ingram, similar to the Battle of Bosworth. He's re-examining the evidence, step-by-step account. These are all fantastic books, and you know, there is a wealth of information out there for you to base your armies on. But don't feel overwhelmed. You can just get things like the Osprey book or some history books, general history books, and they'll be a good primer. Anyway, I think we should probably just sum up, because I've probably gone on for quite a bit. Right, so that's my sort of whistle-stop tour of wargaming in the Wars of the Roses and how I go about it. There's obviously things that I've left out. There's details that I could go into on battles and other things you might want to consider, but that was just a bit of a general overview of the way I approach it. The different rules, the different models that you can do, and hopefully that's answered some of the questions that you may have. If you have more questions, or if there's something that I haven't covered that you want to know about, let me know in the comments. Drop me an email. The email address is down below, and if I can help, then I will. If there's something that you're trying to research, or someone that you're looking for in particular, let me know. I've had a couple of people ask if I know the liveries or the badges for a certain number of people, and I've got an extensive amount of stuff now and books, which I'm always happy to look through and lend a hand if I can. So I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry if it's a bit of a ramble, but there will be some battles coming up. We've got the Wars of the Roses campaign is going to be starting soon. I will get my revenge, and you're going to see some more of those models in action. So I hope you all stay safe, and I'll catch you all again soon. Cheers.